back when I took architecture and like drafting in like 2006, people had to like pass the calipers with two hands to each other because they were so expensive that under no circumstances could they be dropped.
Hello and welcome to Game of Nodes, a weekly podcast on the cosmos from independent caliper teams. And we're here this week with Henry from Penumbra, who's experienced probably one of the strangest cold opens to the podcast yet. Hey, is Dad joining us tonight? I just suddenly realized I didn't ask earlier.
Yes, I think he said he has a conflicting meeting, but will be here any minute.
What is with all these folks with real business activities going on at the moment? So yeah, we've got Henry from Penumbra. We have I guess a few other things. I missed a good episode from you folks last week. Ah, there we go.
Hello.
Speak of the devil, and he will appear, right?
Hello.
That's the one. All right, you said.
I honestly don't even remember what we talked about last week.
You talked quite a bit about. Well, so I would say it was substantially about regulation because the whole SEC thing, and then I was disappointed to note that the one thing that was left in the spreadsheet by me, which was, have you ever seen those Japanese Beatles just fucking each other, was like 5% at most of the show.
Well, it's tough without the context. We're like,
I had no idea what it was about. I was like, I've no.
It's a pretty baffling statement to leave in the fucking spreadsheet. But
all I'm saying is what happens in Amsterdam stays in Amsterdam. Anyway,
was there a lot of beetle fucking in Amsterdam?
No, there wasn't really. I don't know why I sound so disappointed when I said that, but so the actual background to this was I can't even remember why it came up, but you have this beetle with no apex predator or no predator that I think is an invasive Japanese beetle on I'm going to say the west coast, and they just sit around and they fuck and it generates heat and then it kills the plants. It is I think maybe they sit on crops and they fuck. It's something like that, and it came up and I was like, that's very bizarre. But the quote that it was introduced to me with was, "Have you ever seen those Japanese beetles just fucking?" And I was like, well, no, I have not. So I thought I'd pass it on in case you guys could get some mileage out of that for online content. That was my gift to you for last week.
Wow, you're right. It is on the West Coast. Oregon has a huge thing about it. I will add that to the spreadsheet for people to look it up. Yeah,
there you go. So the show notes, everybody, if you're kind of curious. Artifact showed me a video on his phone, and they were indeed really going at it, hammer and tongs. These little wee beetles.
Why does he have a video of fucking beetles on his phone?
I think it was immediately before he then conference called you into our afternoon sitting around.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that though.
Yeah, it was literally like, here's Japanese beetles, here's usurper. So if I looked confused, it was because the thing that had immediately preceded you on the conference call was beetles. That was one
sounds
of the
like a
weirdest
decent
things
enough conversation starter, right?
It does.
Have you seen these beetles?
By the way,
let me tell you about these beetles fucking.
People say that I go off on tangents, which I do.
So you admitted that.
Yeah. I also I thought the thing last week, the conversation was good, and there was a particular point as well where Schultz, you were talking about how the regulation on exchanges is going to change, and I thought it was really, really interesting because you basically spontaneously came up with a design that's actually the regulatory argument being used by some researchers for digital cash at the moment, which is that if you use blind, and we're sorry in advance, Henry, because I'm going to stumble onto territory which I'm not qualified to talk about, which is cryptography.
Just before you start, we only have Henry for 40 minutes, so keep that in mind before you.
Let's move it on to Henry in a second. But we are so blind proofs. Not going to go into them because I don't understand them. But the argument is your first, as I understand it, the first spend using a blind proof to prove that you have the funds can be privacy preserving. And then it's only the person who takes the payment that then has to essentially take that back through an exchange or a money service business or any kind. So they are potentially subject to the regulatory question of where do these funds come from. So it's actually part of a design for digital cash is exactly what Schultze described, where the money services business, bank, whoever that is, exchange might have to be regulated because they're going to get money from all sorts of places, even if it is a CBDC or a digital cash solution that uses something like blind proofs. So I was like, there you go.
Well, I think I deserve a point there. What's the point worth? It's internet points, nothing.
It's a 1-of-1 NFT, no cash value. But so yeah, we have this week Henry from Penumbra, somebody who it took me, I think we briefly met, I think with Jake and 2x4 in Lisbon a couple of years ago. It took me a while to put 2 and 2 together that your GitHub handle was the GitHub handle being pulled in when I did Rust projects for certain libraries, and I was like, hold on one second, this is the same person. But obviously in this context, Henry, are you the what's your official job title in Penumbra, your official role? Is it founder, co-founder?
Yeah, founder's good. I mean, so what happened basically is I had previously been doing a lot of just like cryptography engineering, building tooling for building crypto projects. And the way that had gone is that, I'd sort of be like, oh, like this would be a cool like crypto thing to build. But oops, there aren't any good tools to build it. So I'll like go off and build those tools. And then now that those are built, try and build the next thing and build the next thing and so on. This led me to work on some bigger and bigger projects. Ended up working on Zcash for a while. In the early days of the project to build Zebra, which is like a second Zcash full node. And they actually just finished and tagged their 1.0 release. That's really exciting to see. Although I haven't been, that work was carried on by other people, not just me. And then about 2 years ago, I started thinking about Penumbra as kind of an answer to a question of like, how do you build privacy preserving cryptography that people are actually going to use? Like it's one thing to just like build a bunch of tools where, oh, you could build all these different things. But it's another to have some kind of like theory of change of like, why is this private system going to win compared to some transparent alternative that people could use instead? And so one way to think about Penumbra is actually that it's a very elaborate answer to that question.
So we'll loop back around in a minute to some of the other stuff you said there about your background, but why would you describe it as an elaborate solution?
Well, because it's, like it's an entire like blockchain, private DEX, like it's a new like privacy preserving L1, does cross-chain privacy stuff. Like it's elaborate in the sense that trying to come up with an actual answer of like, how do you build a privacy preserving system that can outcompete its transparent alternatives requires like actually doing that and actually like yeeting an entire new protocol out into the world turns out to be like quite a lot of work.
Yeah. So on that point, I would say that just from dipping into the Discord periodically to see how things are going, there's obviously a lot of vaporware in this system, in this ecosystem, and I think Penumbra is one of those things that is the absolute like axiomatic opposite of vaporware. That the amount of work that's gone into it over the last couple of years, it literally, I think, gives me a bit of a migraine every time I look into your Discord at how much seems to be going on, as well as the complexity of it, which is very. I guess cryptography maybe always looks like that if you are just a normal software engineer who generally doesn't have to deal with cryptography and the maths behind it. But what have been like some of the biggest challenges that you have encountered, and like were they ones you expected from the outset, or?
Actually, no. So especially with like ZK stuff, there's a lot of focus on like, oh, here we're doing these proofs. The proofs are very complicated. Here are all these different advances in proving technology. Here's like the latest proof system, and so on and so on and so on. And for us, we actually found that that wasn't sort of the most difficult or interesting part. And the reason is that like once you change your kind of frame or mindset from like what are interesting things that we could build with all of this like moon math to like what is a useful thing to do, you have to have this kind of like full system perspective on what it is that you're building. And the way that you achieve privacy in a blockchain context is by taking all of the actual execution of everybody's data, taking the user's data itself, moving it all like off chain onto the end user device and having them send these proofs that like, oh, I did my actions correctly, but I'm not going to have to reveal what that action was. And that means that you end up with this totally different state and execution model that is like kind of at odds with the way that a lot of existing systems are built. So as an example, if you're trying to, let's say you're trying to build some app chain, right? And your app chain is like mostly similar to other chains, except that it has like some special thing, that's your application, that's what it does. Then there's a really great solution to that, which is you just use the Cosmos SDK. And it's like this like Rails for blockchains. It gives you your template thing, and then you can add your own custom modules to do your custom thing. And that works if you're doing something that is mostly similar to other systems. But if you want to build something that's like a fundamentally different architecture, you actually have to go all the way down the stack and rebuild a lot of those pieces. And most of the work that we've done has actually been in like building the tools for us to build the chain that we're building. We're kind of like evolving towards here's kind of a framework for how to do custom Tendermint chains in Rust. But that's been something that's a kind of emergent from the work that we've done overall. And sorry, the cat is yelling, but
no worries.
Cats are also friends of the pod.
Yeah. Well, there's an automatic door, and it's voice activated. So the cat yells, and then the door opens eventually.
That's cool.
So I'll get up in a sec. But yeah, it turns out that it's like 90% of the work is just like sending the data around and figuring out how to make that happen. It's actually kind of a rug.
So I mean, obviously, they're big fan of the fact you folks are Rust maxis and doing it in Rust. I guess the voice activated door didn't work, huh?
No,
I think that was the joke. That was a great joke. That was a sweet joke.
Did I just get got?
Yes, you did.
I think so.
Hey, I've got a very young baby. I get got by
that. It took me a minute to get that. I was like, the voice activated door. Surely that's it.
Yeah.
They do have those.
I was like, that would be at odds with somebody who is that would be odds with my impression of people who work on cryptography would be that somebody would allow a voice activated door in their place of residence.
That's right.
Yep. I just slapped a Raspberry Pi and a motor on my door, and so it has a spindle that opened.
It's probably fine. I'm sure there's no software on this that has been owned. It's like I met some people working on digital cash a little while ago, and I was very, very pleased that all of them looked at me like I was a mass murderer when I used a card to pay for a coffee, and all of them had like rolls of little £5 notes that they went around with, and I was like, this is good. I now feel bad about using the card, which I should feel maybe bad about. I don't know, but I've exchanged my privacy for convenience, and I deserve to have a boot around my neck. Anyway,
also those sweet cashback credits. What else are we gonna do? You can't do that with cash.
That's how they get you. That's literally how they get you.
Unless you steal the pennies out of the little drop in there.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, yeah, credit card rewards are sort of like the original like MEV of the economy.
Totally.
If we had somebody clipping quotes from this podcast,
Yeah,
that would be every episode. There's somebody comes out with one amazing one-liner. Thank you, Henry. If you come out with one more, then Schultz will send you a gift basket.
All right. We'll see what we can do.
Why I just volunteer Schultz. Anyway, so yeah, like obviously it pleases and gladdens my heart that you folks are Rust maxis, but I guess that also makes sense based on the stuff that you're doing, that you would want to use Rust for this particular use case. But what made you? I guess the answer I think is going to be obvious, but there have been some other efforts to do chains in Tendermint, using Tendermint that are using Rust. I'm guessing that you folks, well, from what I've seen anyway, you've basically rolled it all yourselves. So, but you are, am I right in thinking you're maybe using the IBC stuff formal or not?
There's some overlap, but we now have our own IBC implementation, just because the sort of chain side implementation of the IBC state machine is pretty intertwined with how the actual chain functions and operates, right? Like in IBC, you have like, oh, chain A is running the light client of chain B and like, deciding whether or not it, accepts the messages, whatever. It's doing all that and like writing into the state of the chain that it's in. And so we're interested in like figuring out some way to like abstract that and kind of commonize it. But I think it's always better to start with one working version and like one example and then generalize from that, rather than starting with how do we make this like very abstract thing that can work with anything. Because a lot of the problem of software development is like going from it's like doing the like draw the rest of the owl on what the requirements are. Along the way to actually building the system, you discover all of these like implicit connections between different parts of the thing. And I think that if you start with like building one useful thing first, generalizing out of that is much easier than trying to be like, oh, we're going to like just have the mind palace, like, and it's going to come out fully formed and be this like perfect artifact.
Right.
That's called ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
Just rewrite it for Penumbra.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, but that's also been kind of the story of the stack that we've built, right? So we started kind of working on this in earnest about 2 years ago, and at that time, I don't think there were any Tendermint chains in prod that were running Rust, with the possible exception of, I think Secret had some kind of thing where parts of it were the SDK and parts of it were Rust stuff. I don't know exactly, but nobody was doing like, okay, the entire chain is just like the app is in Rust and whatever. And so we had to basically figure out how to do that along the way. And so we built up this kind of like little like salami slice, like layered stack. And the lowest levels of the slices have been used like very widely among similar projects. Like the library that we wrote to interface with Tendermint is also used by Anoma for Nemata. And then, we built like a storage system that has like Merkleized data stores, and that's getting used by Astria and so on. And so the hope is that eventually, as we finish our chain, a bunch of the pieces that we built along the way can be reused by other projects. So we're kind of, most of the way through having to have invented our own stack kind of out of necessity.
How many are there working at Penumbra right now? And do they all have a cryptography background, or how did you all like come to work together?
So at the moment, there are 3 teams that are working on Penumbra itself. There's Penumbra Labs, and then we're also working with Strangelove, who are helping with some of the IBC work that we've been doing. And we're also working with Spoken, who are building a web extension and like web front end for Penumbra, which is like a whole other fascinating thing of like, how do you have like a web front end for a transparent or for a shielded chain where like you can't just go and ask some server like, hey, what's my account balance?
Does that mean Penumbra won't have like viewing keys then?
So there are viewing keys that are part of Penumbra, but like you don't want to give out. We're not building the system on the assumption that you're going to hand out your like data to an RPC provider, because that sucks.
Yeah.
So the challenge then is like, how do you like give every user their own local like personal RPC endpoint, and how do you design, you know, that thing to do all of the scanning and synchronization locally?
Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, so we can get into that in a bit. It's pretty neat. But yeah, so there's about the 3 teams working currently on it. At Penumbra Labs, we have about 9 people. And I would say, I don't know, maybe like 1/3 of the team had like previous cryptography experience. People have a lot of different paths. I think the difficulty of like, you know, getting into doing cryptography is kind of overstated. Like, not that it's like nothing, but it's I'm a believer in like roll your own crypto, but like carefully.
But then that is potentially with the luxury of hindsight and expertise.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you don't want to sort of like go off and, you know, do stuff like totally in isolation from the world. But I think one of the things that is one of the best things about the like cryptos and cryptocurrency is that there's very, very little gatekeeping. And you see the like ill effects of that too, of like, you know, people doing wildly irresponsible things and then like losing a shit ton of money. But I think like, you know, is that really like on the devs, or is that on the people who are like aping into shitcoins? I don't know. But all of that aside, the thing that is really, really good and special and like we should defend at all costs is that because it is this like growing industry, you just can't survive if you do gatekeeping. Because like, you know, talent is so hard to find. Like you have to grow it. And the teams that are like have this kind of like open sort of spirit, you know, that's I think a really great and beautiful thing about the ecosystem that I think sometimes gets overlooked.
So yes, I think that's a really good point. I agree that what you just said actually also in general, I think there's been a lot of negative, particularly in the Cosmos, there's been a lot of negativity recently. And I think like it probably would do us well to consider some of those sorts of things a bit more in future in terms of like, this is the, I mean, sorry, no reflection on you, Henry, but this is, to be fair, if I wanted a load of hippie positivity, I could just like text Jake and I'm sure he'd send it to me in spades, because that is his role in my life, is to be the fucking hippie guy from California that's like, everything's gonna be fine, man, you just need to put it in a DAO. But yeah, so like I'm also kind of interested, like, you know, just maybe for the viewers, you don't have to read your whole CV as well, Henry, but like how did you originally sort of get involved in the space full stop? You know, was it that you had an academic interest and an academic background in cryptography first, and then you're like, oh, that's an interesting use case for this, like for applying this, or was it, or am I caught before the horse? And it was
so originally I did math, And around the time of the Snowden revolutions, I kind of got into cryptography. And for me personally, the original motivation was this, like, you can have this very, very interesting interplay between super high level, abstract mathematics, number theory, the geometry of elliptic curves, all this like very abstract stuff. And then when you do implementations of cryptography, you can have very, very low level, like the most low level kind of computer programming of like, what type of hardware does this machine have? Like, what type of registers am I going to use? How do I, have the like dependency chains among the individual instructions so that the whole thing can go very fast? And it's like this, like almost these like two totally different ways of thinking. And one of the most beautiful and interesting things about doing cryptography engineering is that you get to kind of like play both of these areas against each other. So that's kind of my origin story into cryptography.
Before you go on, would you describe yourself as a detail person, like more of a detail person, or more of a big?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But both. That's the thing that's really interesting about it, is that you get to do kind of, you get to like play like sort of change languages as you go. So that was how I got into doing cryptography engineering. But also cryptography as a field is a kind of inherently political thing. Cryptography, if you think of it as sort of the engineering of trust, accountability, information, these are all things that have like very important social implications. And so it's sort of this sort of trifecta of mathematics, computer science, politics, that was very appealing to me.
To that end, I guess where do you live? Are you in the US?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any sort of fear then of, like being shut down, kind of like Tornado Cash, given that it's kind of like to us, it's not very close. However, for the general populace, I think it's just kind of like a squint away from being the same thing, developing a private blockchain versus developing a mixer.
I mean, I think so. The United States is an interesting place. And when crypto people talk about the regulatory environment in the United States, I think they mostly focus on the like financial regulation, right? And I think part of that is because a lot of the activity in the space is in shitcoins, which maybe those could be regulated and that would be fine. But the United States also has very, very strong protections around like freedom of expression, free speech. There's legal precedent about, code is speech. People have the right to publish their ideas about, how things could be organized. And so, and also, with Tornado Cash as an example, right? Like Alexei, who's arrested and just like held in prison without even any fucking charges, that that's not really something that I think, like America has problems, but not that specific problem. And so I think that from a perspective of like freedom of expression, the right to like publish, describe software that expresses some like political idea about how people could coordinate with each other, there's not really a better place in the world to do that. Although there's other issues, and so I don't have a particular concern about that. I think there's pretty strong precedents in the United States about people have a right to develop encryption software, and that's basically what we are all doing.
The insane thing.
We'll just see how it goes. Yeah.
you know the insane thing about the sorry, I don't know his surname, but Alexei, the dev that was jailed, it was in Holland, right? Isn't it? Sorry, not Holland,
Yeah.
the Netherlands. It was in the Netherlands. And the crazy thing about the Netherlands is they are normally a very pragmatic country. I mean, this is a country where Catholicism was outlawed, and their reaction to that was to, when they were sent a police report by like a neighbor, oh, I think Catholics were gathering on Sunday, they would send the police around on Monday so they didn't have to deal with the problem, you know, and thus Catholics secretly met in the country for 300 years until it was unoutlawed. You know, there's literally there's a square in Amsterdam which was owned by all Catholics, and the Dutch authorities went, well, they're all Catholics, but they are doing it on their own property, and property is sacrosanct. So whatever they do in their own homes, you know, they can do. I haven't seen any Catholic stuff happening outside the home. And either they had knocked two houses together, and they had a Catholic church in there for like 200, I forget, maybe not 200 years, but a long period of time. And it's across the road from a Protestant church. So and how quiet could they have been? I mean, the Protestant church congregation would have noticed on Sunday that there were some hymns going on across the road. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's surprising to me that the Dutch are pragmatic people, especially when there's money to be made. Which, you know, we to some extent we are talking about the, well, I guess the Dutch state isn't going to make any money, are they, from taxation, which is, I guess, maybe where we come back into the pragmatism of the Dutch. I don't know, but it does strike me as a bit strange, of all places, that in the Netherlands were the people that would hold somebody without trial for that period of time over something like this, where they are generally quite like individual rights, you know. Maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know. I think,
well, they love illegal fudge anyway.
It's surprising, but I think also this is my like unnuanced take, is I think that in a lot of ways, like, governments in Western Europe are like mostly pretty functional, like 80-90% of the time. And so I think people have a lot more like baseline trust in, like, oh yeah, you know, well, I guess, you know, they probably wouldn't do that for no reason, or, you know, whatever. Whereas in the United States, because the government is less functional, I think that there's a lot more distrust of like the system. And so people are kind of more hesitant to kind of like take claims at face value. But I don't know if I have a really deep sort of take on it.
I appreciate the take regardless, and especially on the encryption side of things. I thought that was a nuanced understanding, which I guess as a founder of an encrypted protocol, you would have a nuanced take.
There's also, like, I mean, people will sometimes talk about like, oh, like, you know, you can just like hop around the world and pick your jurisdiction or whatever. But it's like, you know, at some point, like, you have to have a life and like live in a place and have a community. And, you know, this is where I am now. So here we are. Let's go. But yeah.
Henry, interesting. You're talking before about just the amount of changes you've made, just on the core stack, and, you know, some of the components within IBC. It's interesting to hear Strangelove being involved in that too. Like, we're getting more involved in different chains that are rewriting pretty significant components of this. So what does it mean to be a Cosmos chain in your eyes? And is Penumbra a Cosmos chain? And how's that definition going to change? And like, where do you think this is headed, like, from as a founder of a project like this?
I guess my take is, like, I would be a kind of like more of a sort of stricter interpretation of like Cosmos. Like, a Cosmos chain is any chain that uses the Cosmos SDK. And by that definition, Penumbra actually isn't a Cosmos chain. On the other hand, it is in the Cosmos ecosystem. And that was, you know, primarily motivated by A, like, belief in the app chain thesis, and B, the existence of Tendermint and the existence of IBC. I know there's like a lot of drama, discussion, dissension about like what is the future of Cosmos, what is the future of the hub, etc. I don't really have like a super strong opinion about it because of just like all of my time and attention goes into the project that I'm trying to build.
Yeah.
But I do think that at the level of like the core technology, like I'm way more of like an IBC maxi than I am like a Cosmos SDK maxi.
Yeah.
Like IBC just definitely will win. That's it.
I think we've all said that on this. Like that, it seems like that's the intellectual property that survives no matter what, right?
Yeah.
But you guys are rewriting part of that. But that's not rewriting it, right? That's not forking it. It's enhancing it.
It's not that we're even like. It's probably useful to distinguish between like the protocol and the implementation.
Yeah.
Right. So at the protocol level, we're not changing anything. But
Right.
at the implementation level, we're going to have our own stack that sort of integrates that with what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we want to be able to have a kind of deeper integration with IBC because the eventual sort of long-term vision of Penumbra is being this kind of private cross-chain layer.
Mm-hmm.
We want to help bring IBC to more places, have like more client types. We have some interesting ideas about how you could enhance the security of IBC.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those things, it's like, I don't want Penumbra to sort of be like building an ecosystem. Like I want to be building in an ecosystem.
Right.
And I want to do that so that we can have our like differentiated thing of like, this is what we do. And for everything else, there's like, other chains and they can have the things that they focus on and are good at.
So in the context that Penumbra is sort of, well, via IBC could be a gateway to other places in the cosmos. If you're bridging in from another privacy preserving ledger, DLT, anything really, in another ecosystem, if you then built the sort of IBC enablers to connect with Penumbra, it would be quite a logical place to sort of enter the Cosmos ecosystem, because then a user's privacy guarantees when they land in Penumbra are going to be at least as good as wherever they came from, right? And then if they want to go and just then go and just mash onto the hub and then lose that privacy guarantee, that's kind of on them, right?
Yeah, I think a really interesting angle here is like privacy and fungibility, right? So fungibility is a pretty important property of digital assets that, my Bitcoins are worth the same as your Bitcoins because they're both Bitcoins. But
right, we were talking about this the other week in the context of, the Juno Prop 16 whale. I was like, my Juno is more fungible than his Juno, right?
Right. And as soon as there's this kind of fundamental contradiction where if you have this transparent system where all of the activity is public, then you lose fungibility because someone can say, at some point in the future, and you don't know what that's going to be, like, oh, these tokens are different. They're not, worth as much as these other ones. And so especially in the bridging context, I think it's a pretty interesting use case. Also for liquid staking, right? If you want to have sort of trades between different liquid staking tokens, you might end up having like many different denominations of similar or essentially similar assets, right? Like here's like atoms that are staked with this liquid staking provider or this one or that one or whatever. And one of the really cool things that we built into Penumbra in our DEX is this idea of on-chain routing. So when you submit a trade on Penumbra, rather than saying like, oh, I'm just going to trade X to Y and it'll look at that specific X to Y pair, you submit an intent of I'm putting in X and I want to get Y out, and the chain will figure out what route of different trading pairs is the best one for it to take. And the key thing that unlocks in this sort of like multi-chain world, in this like liquid staked world, where you potentially have many different distinct assets that are somehow related or have like known relationships, or maybe it's just differing over the bridge or the staking provider or whatever, our routing engine can basically route across all of those. So that as a user, I don't have to care like exactly which like subvariant of this token has the deepest liquidity. We don't have to have concentration into specific liquid staking providers or specific bridges or whatever, because we can just sort of
just to
trade
clarify for
Yeah.
listeners what the example there would be. So are you saying in the case that you had like one type of bridged USDC and another type of bridged USDC, you would be looking to route to the most sensible one for the user to execute without them having to specifically say, oh, I want whatever,
Yeah,
USDC or whatever it might be.
Yeah, so like here's an example. Suppose that I have USDC that's bridged from Gravity Bridge, and I want to get ETH that's bridged from Axelar, right? Now I have, really what I want to be doing is this like USDC to ETH trade, but I'm kind of like mixed in this like bridge choice, which I don't really care about that much. And so if I was using another system where there's this kind of fragmented liquidity environment, all of these tokens are all like their own little universes, right? The pool between, Axelar USDC and Gravity Bridge ETH or vice versa is going to be tiny because nobody's going to be market making that specific pair. But on Penumbra, I could submit that trade intent of I want to trade my like Axelar USDC for Gravity Bridge ETH, and the chain just figures out, should I do, a stable swap between the different USDC representations and then go over, whichever Axelar or Gravity has like the deepest liquidity on the USDC ETH pair, then, maybe I have to do another stable swap on the other end. And you don't have to have, you can sort of let liquidity providers decide where are we going to be providing liquidity. And you can cleanly kind of factor out the volatile pairs where there's going to be price discovery happening from the stable pairs where like if I'm doing market making on Axelar USDC versus Gravity Bridge USDC, like I'm not really taking on any price risk other than the bridge risk, which like I can just, unwind, rewind as much as I like, so I can manage that. And so the cost of doing those stable swaps should be very cheap if you can have liquidity providers compete on price.
So how do you, like, perhaps I've not fully understood it, but then if I've understood the problem correctly, how are you able to know that denoms that have, let's say, a different representation or a bridge in a different way but are fundamentally equivalent, how are you folks actually working out what those things should be in that graph where you're trying to work out, essentially like
so we don't actually have to have the chain figure that out. We just determine that based on some basic heuristics and like the amount of liquidity. So it's ultimately like a market allocated thing. If people are going to provide liquidity on different stable swap pairs, they can do so or not. And the chain, like when it's executing a trade, is just going to do a graph traversal and figure out which path is the best. But that path search doesn't have to know anything specific about any of the assets. It's just like, where is the liquidity?
Okay, so the graph traversal does happen on chain then?
Yeah.
When the trade is submitted?
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting.
We spent some time making that fast.
Yeah, I was going to say whether or not that's on chain or on the user's device, like some of the other things you were describing, that feels like definitely in the category of hard things.
Yeah. So like I mentioned at the beginning, we sort of built up our stack incrementally. One of the things that we actually built along the way is our state and storage system. And the way that we do it in Penumbra is we model every sort of part of the chain state as having these sort of independent copy on write forks. So anytime everything is snapshots, everything is like a write to only my local changes on top of my snapshot, and those may eventually get committed back or not. And what that lets us do is actually have a paradigm where every single execution of any kind is a simulation. And some of those simulations we later commit to the chain state, but we always have the choice whether to commit or discard. And so when we're doing this like graph traversal, we can actually just like do this like parallel search of like simulating every possible route that we want to explore in these like different forked universes, and then like pick which one we want and say like, okay, that was the best execution. Now let's do it.
This reminds me of working with RDF data back in the day, where you quite often have like a large, let's say, government data set, and you might want to overlay some new data from, let's say, a new financial year or whatever. And so you end up having to, you can't really add just one node to a massive data set of triples. You have to instead overlay a new subgraph, then examine what the new universe looks like, and then say, do I want to combine these two and then commit my new universe? And it gets quite quickly mind-boggling. I remember, so I can't even imagine.
It's exactly like that.
It must get for your use case.
But luckily, we can kind of encapsulate all of that machinery, and so we just have this sort of, here's a state instance, and you read to it and write to it, and this is why we use Rust. It's that we can build all these nice abstractions. And it has a lot of cool performance benefits too, right? Like, because we're always writing into a cache, we're just doing like in-memory writes. And if we're ever like reading data that we've recently written, we don't have to go all the way down into the like underlying disk storage to go get that data. You sort of have this like built-in locality.
Oh, so it's a little bit like the Nomic, like the way Nomic did their Merc, like the tree thing, where it's all basically in memory, and then it gets flushed to whatever the underlying data layer was, like rocks or whatever it was.
So we only do one commit per block. It's beautiful.
That is pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I appreciate you said you had to go. Do you have any time to talk about the stuff on client devices? Because that sounds really
sure. I do have to run. I have an appointment in 8 minutes, but I can just use up the time by running to it. So the cool thing about the client devices, right, is this problem of when you introduce privacy into blockchains, you quickly realize that the sort of existence of this big database in the sky with everybody's state in it is actually this load. That's the problem that you're trying to solve, but it's also this load-bearing component of pretty much every single workflow. And when you bring in privacy, who gets access to what information, that adds this entirely new design access, right? And in terms of the data access, that means that now my wallet has to know about, what is my account state. It can't just go and ask some server, because the point is that I want to keep my data to myself and have control over it. So we actually, that was the first thing that we started with. It wasn't like, how are we going to implement all of our proofs right from the get-go? It's how do we solve the personal data problem? And what we ended up building is this thing called a view server, personal view server, that is basically like a personal RPC endpoint. So you can think of this as being kind of like a micro node that synchronizes with the chain state, but instead of synchronizing every single block and every single transaction and doing all of the chain state, it only it scans and filters for only the parts of the data that are relevant to your specific user and your account. and saves and indexes all of that data locally. It's built to be this like lightweight embeddable component. When you run our command line tool, it actually like starts this node internally and does like in-memory requests to it. And what the Spoken team has built that people can actually go and try out now, although it's still alpha quality, is an extension for Chrome that runs the Penumbra view server in the extension, does all the scanning and synchronization locally, and then you can have this kind of connect to wallet-like flow where you can go to a front end, like app.testnet.penumbra.zone, and that front end can be querying the browser extension as like, here's a like personal RPC for something that is going to know about like just my account state.
That's pretty cool.
Really cool.
That's pretty cool.
So yeah, I do got to run, but the kind of interesting takeaway there that I think people should sit with is there's a really interesting interplay between privacy on the one hand and scalability on the other. A lot of the time people are like, oh, is it ZK for privacy or is it ZK for scalability? And although those are sort of two different initial directions, I think that they have a kind of convergent evolution, because if you think of sort of this perfectly scalable system, then it shouldn't be broadcasting information unnecessarily. And if you think of a private system, the fact that you're not disclosing additional information means that other people who aren't you don't have to be, like they can't see that information anyway, so they don't have to process it.
Yeah, that's I've heard a similar argument about digital cash, where if you issue tokens but then recycle them very frequently, chain state never gets out of control because the ledger
Right.
is only ever so big, right? It's only ever as long as the in-flight transactions, which on the Visa networks, 1,700 a second at absolute peak. And then it's only that many things written to disk, which is like a megabyte, probably, or less. So that's really interesting. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Henry. I know we've been trying to arrange it for like a year, so we really appreciate it.
Thanks, Henry.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, man.
So I did track down that wallet, and I have it in the show notes, so people will be able to try it out if they want to. Henry is such a positive influence in the ecosystem. Every time I chat with him, he's just he's obviously is like a mega mind.
Dude, it gets
like,
fucking crazy smart.
He is. So like you just kind of have to sit back and like let it glow.
I was just soaking it in.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got a great vibe as well. Like he's
got a good vibe.
Yeah.
Just for those listening, we'll add it to the show notes. You should follow Henry on Twitter as well. Lots of hot takes, lots of memes, good value for money in terms of being free as well. I think my crypto Twitter, I only follow about 5 or 10 people, and Henry is one of them. So strong recommend.
Yeah,
he'll go high.
A lot though.
He does, but he also has a really good way of explaining complicated topics on Twitter. There have been a couple times 100%. Where like someone will say something about secret, and Henry will pop in and be like, "Well, actually, hold on," and I'll come away and be like, "I feel like I might have learned something, but more importantly, I might have lost all respect for myself."
That's okay.
Which is the more important thing, really, isn't it? Just
yeah, exactly.
Lose self-respect. I was towards the end of that. I was like, I literally cannot take up any of Henry's time because we've got a limited slot and we need to get some value for money. But a friend of mine who's very like cryptography and chaos computer clubby and whatnot in Germany back in the day sent me this sticker, which you see. It's one of when there was the asylum campaign for Snowden in Germany. That's one of the stickers from that. It's just sat around here on my guitar in the office.
I remember whenever the Snowden thing happened, I didn't expect to happen what happened. I didn't expect him to be vilified. I thought he would be considered, not a hero necessarily. I think it's a bit strong, but I thought things were going to go differently. The fact that he's still in exile effectively, it's just wild to me.
It is genuinely baffling, isn't it? I mean, I would say hero, and I'm not even in the States. Like, we're just in a Five Eyes country that are affected by your domestic anti-terrorism policies, and yeah, I mean, I think that there's like I think if you see like any generational shift in like resistance to mass surveillance or greater awareness of mass surveillance or anything like that, I think it does genuinely start with Snowden. Like, it's really hard to overstate just, and yet it's still, and like, it has kind of been expunged from the historical record a little bit. Like,
Well,
just,
Big Brother used to be a joke, right? You'd be talking about something, you'd be like, oh, Big Brother's probably listening. And now you can be like, well, Big Brother is quite literally listening. We know for a fact that he's listening right now.
we are certain that the government, not just Jeff Bezos via Alexa, but also the government via emails. I mean, but that's the flip side, isn't it? You can't expect Snowden to be a universal hero in a world where people bring Alexa into their own homes.
This podcast is probably the most secure communication channel we can come up with, actually.
I think it's
nobody's fucking listening to this.
It's, I mean, well, the thing is, you said,
like,
but like the correct size for dissemination of information, but also resistance to infiltration for a terrorist cell is about 3. So, you know, by having any listeners, we are already exposing ourselves to severe operational risk, I would say.
What's sad is the government they're killing themselves not being able to listen in on our private signal chat, but they would never watch this fucking podcast. It's basically the same thing.
This is a hell of a tangent, but
please,
like,
this is a game of notes.
Yeah, well,
yeah, seriously,
even this seems a little bit off kilter. So Reddit recently like changed their API policy, right, where they're charging significantly more. Right?
The Apollo blow up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And what I think is really, really interesting about this is so many of these subreddits have gone dark. They've gone private. So now it used to be that you'd Google something and some of the most helpful links would be from Reddit. You're like, oh, I need to solve this programming problem. And then inevitably Reddit, like on Programmer Humor or something, will like have a pithy answer for what it is. And that answer is actually true. Well, with all these subreddits that are now blacked out, you can no longer find the answers on Google because you can't actually access the subreddits that have the answer.
Right.
And the problem there, I think, is really interesting because so many communities are like going to Discord now. Like almost all of the networks that we're on, like their primary communication is Discord or Telegram.
Ugh.
But those you can't index, right? Those are private. And so all this information that is being shared in Discord can't be indexed. You can't Google it. You can't look up, oh, what's the answer to this? We know it's stated in Discord. And I think that's creating such a big hole of knowledge that I don't know what the answer is, but it makes me push back on Discord a little bit.
Do you think it's just that we're at a point now where, you know, everything is always, well, actually, no, I guess I would say this because my intellectual basis is the European socialist left, but everything's a dialectic, obviously. So, you know, it swings one way, then it swings the other way, you know. Are we just at the point where we had a very open internet in the early days? Governments decided that was great for taking all our data. Companies decided it was great for taking all our data. And so people have gone like, you know, whether that's the reason or some other thing, just, you know, convenience or just commercial pressure or whatever, people have gone into these more closed communities where, to be fair, a company is still taking and selling your data. So if that was the reason, then don't even waste your time, folks. But we're now just at the other end of the pendulum swing, and like we can expect more open protocols, more open services in the future, or I don't know. It's hard to say, isn't it?
If only there was a Twitter for the blockchain.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
That'd be nice.
Well, I think yeah, okay. Well,
I heard some wanker developed that.
Yeah. I think we can take it as read. There'd be a wanker.
Yeah.
I mean, from a business perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense to have the groups like isolated, like Discord and Telegram and WhatsApp do, right? Like these are quite large communities. I think the Swede Discord is the largest one I'm in, and it has like 400,000 people in it, right?
That's
like,
crazy.
That's pretty big.
That's crazy big.
And from Discord, it becomes a walled garden. they have
Yeah.
complete control, and so it makes
Yeah.
perfect sense from a business perspective. But it doesn't make nearly as much sense from like a user perspective, in my
but
opinion.
I agree. It's a total information suck, right? Like the search tools are terrible. It's in the app. Like you can't really do it across channels, or you can do it across channels. You can't do it across domains, whatever
Servers.
servers, I guess,
Yeah.
whatever you
Also,
want to call them.
do you feel like the noise is like non-linear? I feel like that's the case with Discord.
Oh, it's fucking garbage.
It's
Yeah.
like it's exponential
Spam and like
noise,
fucking,
like
oh my god.
absolutely getting out of control. I just noticed friend of the podcast recently elevated to part-time presenter of the podcast, Ben Davis, has missed our guest.
Yeah, good timing.
Great timing.
Yeah.
Spectacular timing.
But I mean, from the open web perspective, yes, anything like that should be number one. I don't know if Reddit's the right place for that type of structure, but whatever. But I mean, I agree that it's a huge issue when you can't search that, or when those results get pulled out because the pages are down or whatever else. It's a hassle.
Well-
and I guess that's the whole point of the whole lockout.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to call it. Right.
Yeah.
And honestly, not to talk about that, but I've been following that guy, and like Reddit did not do a great job in terms of how to communicate this in the timelines associate. That guy who runs Apollo, also not the best business negotiator in the world. Like that was like, I'm folding my hands and I'm walking away and blah blah blah. I'm going to make a big deal out of it, and like it's like you got to put 10 years into this stuff. You got to think a little bit longer term than that. But yeah, it just seems like that's just a shit show all around. And I don't blame Reddit for charging for API feeds. I think totally reasonable, right? Like they should. No different than Twitter should have, but 10 years ago. Like if you want to do a third party and you want to be able to do that, then offer something that has a value and be able to come up with a reasonable price for that. The hell.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the crux of the issue isn't that they are charging for API; it's how much they're charging, right? Like the conservative estimate for how much they're charging is 20 times more than how much Reddit actually makes per user, and I think that's where like the core issue really came in.
Yeah.
To kind of wrap up my thoughts on the subject, a lot of people have been talking about federated instances of replacing Reddit, which is Lemmy, I guess. I haven't actually used it, or not Blue Sky, Mastodon for Twitter.
Yeah,
and
my Mastodon.
I don't know. I tend to disagree. I have always had a lot of difficulties searching those, so I don't think it really solves the issue of searchability and user friendliness. I think those, like, while federated is a really cool concept, I appreciate it. One, the user experience sucks. Two, you can't search as well. I don't know if they can be indexed or there's some indexing issue with it.
You can search across them, right? It's like that actually, the Mastodon stuff is pretty cool. Like it's kind of like the IBC of Twitter, right? Like the way that you can be able to move your profile across different servers, and like how that search tool works. And like I don't know how well it scales. I think it's gonna find out here pretty soon.
Well, it can search, but can Google index it is the thing? Because I've never been able to actually like find federated Mastodon servers that I can actually try information from. Like you can.
No, that's a good question.
Google indexing it might be a bug, not a feature.
I think you can. Well, true. Web. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know if I found really good. I mean, being able to search for somebody's Twitter handle is one thing, but finding value on Twitter is a little bit difficult. But yeah. But that was a good conversation.
I think that's also like maybe a function of so I spent a bunch of time in my life working on the federated web in the context of RDF, and the thing what's RDF?
What's RDF?
RDF is linked data, so machine readable data. It's what Tim Berners-Lee did after the World Wide Web, basically.
Got it.
Is okay, what if every database exposes an API endpoint that every other database can speak over a protocol? And then you can make federated queries across all graph databases in the meta network of graph databases. It's a grand vision, didn't end up happening. And I always tended to think that the reason for that might be because the focus was on the data store rather than the protocol itself. And, you know, obviously also it was all XML, and so that changed, and then JSON LD, and then technology moved on, right? And also the thing is, like, key bono, man, like academics fucking bono if you can just query all data everywhere with machines. Governments bono, people who want to do helpful public goods things bono. nobody's making a whole load of cash. Like the people who care about that kind of shit are like NASA for weather data and combining large graph data sets, you know? So yeah, I kind of think that like maybe some of the federated like social stuff suffers from the same problem where, at least from my understanding of a lot of it, it's not maybe thinking about it from protocol up, which is like maybe a little bit of the benefit of if you start working in smart contracts and ledgers, is that you almost have to start with the protocol, sort of, and then sort of define up from there, because probably your blockchain is a bit of an abstraction to you. Unless you're the big brains at Penumbra, in which case you're building your blockchain abstraction as well as you go. So I don't know. It's hard to say because, like, obviously, like like Henry was saying, you can't also build a protocol as a platonic ideal either. So maybe it's just one of those hard engineering problems where you can have, like distributed systems, you can have fast, reliable, whatever. You can't have all three. I can't even remember what the three are, the ones that
It's fast, reliable, and cost, right?
No, the three.
No, it's
Well, time and cost is definitely one. Quality, time, quality, cost. I guess reliability is quality.
No, I'm thinking of like with specifically with distributed systems, it's like about replicating and stuff. You can have like essentially finality. You can have it's like, what is it? Finality, liveness, and integrity are the three, something like that.
Oh, okay. So we're talking about like database and stuff with like
we're talking about
sharding and stuff. And
yeah,
okay,
got
it.
I thought it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Not on this podcast, my guy.
Not on this one. Noel's been muted for an hour and 6 minutes.
Rest assured, I am still here. I just like Henry was a bit big brain and kind of fried my shit a little bit, and I was just didn't really have much constructive stuff to add to it, so I thought I'd just shut the fuck up and listen, try and learn something.
I did learn something.
I mean, his dry humor around the automatic door.
Yeah.
Whenever he threw that one down, it took me a second to like process it, and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be good."
They do have those doors. Like I know they do exist. Like you could do it where it like actually responds to something like that. But yeah.
Look, I got. You got to respect the player of the game, I would say.
Oh man,
about that one,
which surprises me because that to me seemed like a pretty like British tier joke. Like if I would have seen that on Monty Python, then I would like it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Right, but the shibboleth here is that British people know when we meet another British person, we're like, we both hate each other, we hate the world, and we're going to just try and outdo each other in verbal shitposting. This is understood. It's understood. There are rules to the game, Schultzy. You don't expect it from a Canadian?
Question mark.
I had a bit of a moment there. I realized I don't know Henry's nationality, but I maybe think Canadian.
Well, they said they lived in the U.S., and that's, I don't know, good enough for me, I guess.
American, Canadian, North
kind
American.
of seemed American.
North American.
Yeah, it's interesting how the quality of the podcast has gone from
it's gotten dumber.
High level, yes, like high level cryptography concepts to like, what do we reckon? Canadian or American?
How many guns do you own?
How do you feel about them guns? Oh, Canadians have guns too, right? Well, right, you are like more the merrier. So, I've also
we have some Cosmos stuff, right?
I've also just noticed your screen behind you, Usurper. That's very much the mood. So I was going to ask, in the context of, I caught up on last week's episode. It was great. The SEC stuff has me asking, is this the end for Zombie Shakespeare? Your screen behind you.
Yins? Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of seems to suggest the answer, huh?
Yeah. I thought I'd mix it up a little bit.
You mix it up a little bit. Can you just program anything on that screen? Is that
if I spend the time actually doing it? Yeah.
if I spent the time to actually make the fucking
I was
thing
on conference calls
Photoshop?
today. I was bored. Yeah, it's exactly what happened. So
This
you did a before we run out of time this week. You did a poll. You want to go through your poll findings? Your Twitter poll?
It wasn't so much of a poll, was it, as me shitposting and then seeing what came back.
Tomato.
Yeah. So there was a thing here, and it got a little bit silly because obviously I forgot that people were going to just go, "You should know this. You're in core one." But I asked a question, which we have asked on this podcast a bunch of times. Genuine, non-facetious question: what are the user needs in Cosmos, and what common tasks are users trying to achieve? And the TLDR of this is a lot of people replied. Some people were like, "You're on core one. You should fucking know that."
A valid point.
Fair point. I wasn't
Fair.
talking about Gino.
It's not about me. It's not about me. Yeah.
Yeah. There were quite a few. Of that kind of ilk, and some of them from other project people from other projects. And I was like, let's not throw stones, folks, in a bear market.
That's
right?
bullshit. They don't know either.
Let's be nice. Anyway, the conclusion was there are a bunch of replies, some of the better ones. Jorge from Stargaze said all roads lead to NFTs.
Wait, what was the question?
So, genuine, non-facetious question: what are the user needs in Cosmos? What common tasks are people trying to achieve? Users. Like, I don't want to know about fucking stake some tokens, sit on them for 5 years. Just making money, not a user need to me. Like, it is a user need to some people, but it's not that interesting.
It's a byproduct of a user need.
Yeah, exactly.
They need to be able to run and track their steps. Is what they need.
He knows it. He knows it. Especially to make like what was it, $44 a day at peak, something like that. 140.
Was it that much? No, it wasn't.
There was an insane.
Wait, which one are you talking about? Are you talking about the near thing?
I think in like The Economist, this is how mental it was. It was like The Economist had like an infographic of like peak crypto market, what people were making potentially per day on those step apps just by sending their data and then getting tokens. And it was like, you could if you like we all now do, we all obviously work at McDonald's again now. So you can make more than your McDonald's job by just harvesting those shitcoins.
Man, I would have played Pokemon Go and taken steps every day if I had known that. God,
that's amazing.
I'm so far behind the freaking. Anyway, go ahead.
So there's some good, like I said, there was some response to that. Obviously, Jorge is one of my favorites. All roads lead to NFTs, which genuinely I think actually their users are certainly asking to fucking mint NFTs and then do lots of tasks with NFTs. So,
and the definition of NFT will change, and I like that answer has layers.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. Jorge is pretty smart. We're big fans of Jorge. Mm-hmm. So Simon Water from Confio, Cosmwasm, another friend of the show,
and Noise
asked, also Big Brain, asked, "Do you have users? You have users?" Which I think actually also neatly sums up the problem for a lot of the Cosmos. Instant Jesus on Twitter said,
"Good
easy, find out what blockchains are actually for."
First, step one.
Step one. Step two, question mark. Step three, profit. Love that answer. Brain Tricks said, we unironically aren't there yet. We're very behind in apps, let alone things to do that aren't financially driven. I think we would all agree with that.
Yep.
These are the highlights of the comments as far as I could tell.
Were the other ones just yelling at you, basically?
Yeah, and then
comments.
Zeke, another friend of the podcast, and Dowda Super Dev, basically said, "Make friends, shitpost, buy bad kids," which I think are actually three completely valid use cases for the Cosmos. So there was a bunch of also discussion around on-chain entities and stuff, which a lot of it was quite like aspirational for the future would be my way of putting it. But I will allow for start an on-chain entity because it is a fully novel use case. And obviously we're big fans of DAO on the show. So the conclusion of me posting that question and then harvesting the responses for engagement for 3 days, and getting 10,000 or so impressions as well in the process, was buy and trade bad kids, make money, because it is one, even if I'm not so bothered. And then number 3, start an on-chain entity. Those were the 3 actual use cases. And maybe the real DAOs were the friends we've made along the way, to paraphrase what Zeke definitely was not saying. So yeah, there you go.
So on-chain entity, that's a good use case. Like, that's a real use case, which is going to take some time, right? Like, it's not a 2023 type of thing, I don't think.
For sure.
Okay.
I'd be surprised if it was.
Yeah. The rest of these are all a bit either facetious or whatever. So, did you get any real answers?
Well, so
anything else come up?
So with apologies in advance to anybody that's listening right now, because I'm going to show something on the stream. We'll put it in the show notes. What's going on here? But what the purpose of this entire thing was, at the moment, I'm working with a bunch of product people in my day job, and I'm reminded of product maturity mapping, right? Where you do something like this. Where you have you have a value chain, and you show where how mature a product is, right? Where if you can create a product that's over on the left there in the Genesis area, where you have to do actual R&D to work out whether this thing even has a market, and then take it to maturity, like commodity, that's how you make $1 billion, right? This is literally the product development matrix for how you make $1 billion. Like, it was originally the person who did Wardley mapping. Simon Wardley was, my understanding, is the commercial guy who was tasked with taking Ubuntu from a tiny percentage of the server market to being the definition of a commodity, where you say, I want web server, don't care about what web server is, give me server, and they give you an Ubuntu server by default, which is what they do now.
When you ask for a server, that it is an Ubuntu server, or basically Ubuntu turns into that definition. Yeah.
So he has a little bit. His presentation style is a bit annoying, but I feel like he might a little bit have credibility within that. The other definition of a utility, of course, is literally, buying your electricity. If you're making a build or buy decision as a business, you're not going to be like, we're going to build our own energy grid, lads. You're going to buy energy. You're going to buy your internet, your natural gas, depending on which country you're in. Anyway, so and this then was me throwing 2 use cases that came out of this actual discussion on a Wardley map, right? And it's a bit shit map because I did it in about 10 minutes before the show tonight, and you can't really read it, so sorry about that. But the left one is create a DAO, the right one is send user tokens with some financial value. And so you can see, like, the things here that are super mature, right? RPCs are pretty mature. They're very fungible. Validators, in theory, are quite fungible. There's a stable coin down there, the Cosmos SDK. So these are all the things that, the further you go down, the more hidden they are from a user, right? But what's super interesting is that if you want to send somebody anything with value, eventually, I figure you get to taxes at the bottom there. But a lot of the stuff around the DAO stuff, it stays over here in this really custom, interesting product area where it's valuable, it's new, its value isn't defined yet, and it's just waiting to be commoditized. So it makes me think that a lot of that, financial type stuff, again, we kind of go on about users' needs about real products. A lot of the financial stuff is still like, it's very hard to define without it touching the real world. Whereas that DAO stuff is just there. It's in a new product area. It's waiting to be commodified. So anyway, that was me during my conference calls today, doing work that I shouldn't have been doing. Was doing a Wardley map about DAOs. So I hope people on the stream enjoyed that slightly insane diversion.
I'm so happy that after 66 episodes, we finally got into PowerPoints on stream.
We've
gone full boomer on here.
Here is my business development thesis for the Cosmos.
Hold on.
But this is the
Hold
thing,
on,
right?
kids.
Okay, right. I have been
presentation
accused,
for you coming.
I have been accused on many occasions of not having a strategy or a plan in terms of the projects that I interface with. I literally just presented a PowerPoint on show on the show. So when I unironically say that yes, I don't do Twitter Spaces, but you can join Game of Notes 2100 every Wednesday, and you could have
That's
a
right.
PowerPoint about my thesis on Juno.
That's right. Rama says, thanks for the TED Talk.
Thank you, Rama. You are an inspiration, as always, to my aspirations to become more corporate.
Not only do taxes got mentioned on a PowerPoint. Fucking amazing.
As a value enabler as well. It's like all the
This is amazing.
Not only do we piss people off with the PowerPoint, but we also...
Taxes was in a box with an arrow going to it. It's fucking awesome.
And it was the end of the boxes. Like
That's right.
everything leads to taxes.
Everything.
Which
eventually all this shit you do ends up in taxes in a box.
And in some way, it wouldn't have any value without those taxes, because it turns out the entire thing is a massive circle tax.
Everything is. No, you said something really perfect there, but I think you're on mute.
It wasn't important.
God damn it. The one thing. The one time.
One thing I want to throw in there is with the question of what are users trying to achieve, like what are common tasks and whatever. I want to talk about like the opposite. I think the go-to conversation piece for what like crypto can do is for NFTing like mortgages or house deeds. And I think that's a horrible use case.
That's a rubbish use case, in my opinion.
But everyone brings it up. But like they talk about like how much simpler it could be to like get a mortgage. And there's a lot of protections there. There needs to be a lot of protections there. There isn't. When there isn't, 2008 happens again, right? And God, I don't know. So if you have like if you can transfer deeds simply, fine, great, whatever. But like there would need to be better handling of your keys. Like you lose your keys, therefore you lose the deed to your house permanently. Like, come on now.
That's insanity, isn't it? Like there's a reason that these things are literally held by the state, that you pay taxes to, so they provide public goods for people that live in the country. And it's so that if you do lose that stuff, you go to whatever the equivalent of, actually, to be fair, I don't think it is Somerset House anymore, but whatever the equivalent of that is in both the UK and the US, and you say, hi, my name's Frey, I have a mortgage, I need to find out about the property deed, it's this address, here's my driving license, so you know I'm not some fucking random. Could I see it, please?
That does exist though, because I used it last year actually. I'm trying to remember. I was actually doing a quick Google on who we use, because I was doing something with a family member's home. Figure is who I use. So they're not actually
NFT deed.
No. It wasn't that piece. They were just using the blockchain throughout the refi process. So they were using it to. I mean, you can go look and see. I think it's figure.com.
Refi? Is that regenerative finance?
No, refi as in I have a mortgage. I want to refinance that mortgage.
Oh, okay.
That's what I mean there. But also I think this was I was doing a refi or a bridge for somebody, or a HELOC as they call it, like a home equity line of credit. And I think Figure uses it as, who knows, it might be mostly marketing, who gives it, what the fuck, but they use it, I think as items come in and as documents get produced, I think they're using the chain somehow in terms of ensuring that throughout this process that there's some sort of integrity there. But you can look and I think it's figure.com. I'll put a link in the show notes as well. But we use them. I think I use them. It was 2021, actually, a couple of years ago.
So I think that's a valid use case, and like making sure the validity of each state of the process makes sense. Similarly, like the discussion of supply chain on blockchain makes sense. I actually do think that makes sense. If you are making a claim that you are having organic goods or whatever, or that everything is built.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know. That got killed, right? Because SAP had that huge thing with Maersk, right? And that got shit canned too. Or no, IBM and Maersk had that huge blockchain project that they were trying to do, like global shipping container structures on the chain, and that all fucking died. But that might have been because it was too large. Like they might have been trying to do it globally.
I think it's too slow, too large. And then for the corporate social responsibility thing,
6 second block times, was fast enough or what? It's a container. How fast does it need to be?
No, I mean just like the amount of data, I think is the problem. But also like when it comes to like corporate social responsibility, which is the other thing you hear about, I think like Schultzy was kind of getting at that use case, like organics, fair trade, anti-slavery, that kind of stuff. The point is that ultimately it has to be certified by somebody on the ground who can just falsify the record. And the primary problem you have with certification is the certification itself. So the blockchain doesn't solve that. And there is actually at least one that I know of, but multiple projects that have tried to do this with a relatively credible team, a relatively credible set of advisors, and absolutely smashed into a brick wall because everybody in the industry just went, look, the certification you're looking for already exists over here, and it's expensive. There's a reason it's expensive, because they have to send people out, or they have to have people in country to do XYZ. And the technology doesn't matter. It can be an MS Access database. It can be a spreadsheet. It can be a big piece of paper, because at the end of the day, it can be a folder with all the certifications sent back from the people who are qualified to make that certification. But the database is not the problem. And if data integrity is a problem, put JSON schema in front of your database and you're done. You can still have your MS Access database.
Yeah.
Hot take.
Hey, I used to work on a lot of data integration stuff, and there are a lot of different ways of solving the schema registry thing in terms of data integrity. Blockchain is just one of many. It's a very slow way of achieving that.
So no new use cases for your Twitter poll then? Is what you're saying?
Bad kids? Bad kids? Is that okay? Could bad kids get us out of the bear on their own?
By the way, that Stride. So I voted no on this Stride thing. So somebody want to talk about this governance proposal on Stride buying bad kids as an asset?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I thought it was. I mean, I voted no because I thought it was like degen as shit. But do you guys want to like at least talk about what that is?
I mean, what's more to say? I guess Stride wants to buy bad kids with, I think, community funds, right? But I haven't looked too much into the prop, to be honest. I read it and was just like, Jesus God. And I have
So ultimately they want to take user dollars that are real dollars flowing in and buy NFTs, right? And be able to hold those NFTs as an asset that could grow over a period of time. Is this a separate pool, or this gets folded into an existing pool of some sort?
I'm not sure. That's why I need to look more into it. Like,
Yeah.
if their goal here is to take Stride from the community pool, buy bad kids, and put bad kids in the community pool, so the community can then like do something with it if it went up in value or whatever, fine. I don't really care too much about diversification, or rather, I care deeply about diversification. I don't want to make a big point out of it. You can make an argument either which way, and bad kids are the de facto blue chip NFT of the Cosmos, and so and by extension, you would be giving credence to the Cosmos NFT for system for that. Which fine, I'm fine with that.
It is what they're doing, right? I mean, I'm not talking bad on bad kids. I hold a shitload, right? But you're basically saying that it's an asset that has the ability to grow over time. And so if that asset's going to grow, I'm treating it as a security. Hello. And I'm treating this NFT as something that has value that I'm expecting I'm going to buy. And it's going to increase in value based on the work of others, in essence. So I thought it was a bit too G-Gen. I thought it was a bit too early in this life cycle to me. But I don't know. I voted no. Everybody shit on me for it. They could vote their own shares. The fucking validator thing. You shouldn't be voting anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I still like the idea of Aptos's method of doing it, where voter and validator are separate in theory. Like you can have them the same
governance and whatever.
Yeah. I think that's great. I wish. I don't feel qualified to vote on all these different things.
Seriously, right? Like this situation, like it's just like that's the whole thing. Is like people look to validators for like incredible guidance around these types of issues, and I agree that you're more involved, so therefore you have more opinion around it. But that doesn't make them an authoritative source on what the right thing is to do, right? Anyway, so I thought it was. I think that's the first time it's ever happened, right? I don't think we've ever had a situation where a liquid staking or